So how do psychologists really figure out what's going on inside someone's mind? It's not some magic test or a single crystal ball. It's more like a detective's toolkit, filled with different instruments, all designed to piece together the full story of a person. And in this explainer, we're going to open up that toolkit and see exactly what's inside.
Here's our game plan. We'll start with the big idea, the assessment puzzle. Then we'll dive into the core conversation, look at the power of simple observation, check out those standardized tests, understand the importance of life history, and finally, see how it all comes together to create one cohesive picture.
First things first, let's talk about the mindset behind all of this. Psychological assessment isn't about finding one single answer or slapping on a label. Nope, it's way more like solving a complex puzzle. And as any good detective knows, one clue is never enough to crack the case. You need to gather evidence from all over.
And this quote, it absolutely nails the core idea. The real goal isn't just to collect a bunch of isolated scores from tests. The art is in weaving all that information together, from conversations, from tests, from life history, to build a rich, comprehensive understanding of a person. It's all about finding the connections and the context.
Okay, so where does this whole process actually begin? Well, it starts with the most fundamental, most important tool in the entire kit, the assessment interview. This is where the person's own story begins to unfold, straight from the source.
Now, this is so crucial. Without a good interview, most psychological tests are just numbers floating in space. They're basically meaningless. The interview is the narrative thread that ties everything else together. It gives meaning to test results and uncovers all these little details about a person's life that a standardized form could never ever capture. It is the absolute foundation.
And during this conversation, the psychologist is also conducting what's called a mental status examination, or MSE. Think of it as a systematic way of observing someone's current state of mind. They'll notice things like appearance and behavior. Then they'll assess mood and affect. Which is really interesting. It's the difference between how you say you feel inside and the emotion you actually show on your face. They'll listen closely to speech and thought process. Is it logical? Does it make sense? And finally, they'll check on cognition, things like memory and concentration. It's a real-time snapshot of how a person's mind is working right then and there.
All right, the next tool in our kit is the fine art of observation. Because, let's be real, what a person doesn't say, what they communicate through their actions and body language, can sometimes be even more revealing than their words. This is all about gathering clues beyond the direct questions and answers.
So observation really happens in two main ways. First, you've got the nonverbal cues that happen during the interview. Things like eye contact, fidgeting, or how someone holds themselves. But then there's what's called naturalistic observation. This is about seeing how a person acts in their own element, like watching a child on the school playground. Both of these give you incredibly valuable and very different kinds of information.
Okay, now we get to the tools you're probably waiting for, the standardized psychological tests. These are the more formal instruments, the measurement tools designed to look at specific aspects of a person's personality and how they function, all in a very structured way. And these tests pretty much fall into two big families. On one side, you have objective tests. These are direct, kind of like questionnaires with true-false answers or rating scales, where your responses are compared to a large, standardized group. On the other side, you have projective tests. These are much more ambiguous. They use things like ink blots or vague pictures. The whole idea is that you'll project your own unconscious thoughts and feelings onto the image, revealing parts of your inner world you might not even be aware of. And here are some of the classic examples you've probably heard of. For objective tests, you've got the MPCE012, a really broad personality inventory, or the Beck Depression Inventory, which is much more focused on symptoms of depression. And for projective tests, of course, there's the famous Rorschach inkblot test, and the Thematic Apperception Test, the TAT, where you tell stories about different pictures to reveal your underlying drives and conflicts.
But here's the thing. All these interviews and observations and tests, they don't just happen in a vacuum. To really, truly understand someone, a psychologist has to zoom out and look at the context. And that means digging into a person's life history and their environment.
This is where something called collateral information is just so important. It basically means gathering data from other places to help build out that bigger picture. We're talking about looking at things like medical records or old school reports, and sometimes, when it's appropriate, it might even mean talking to people who know the person really well, like family members or teachers. Each source adds another valuable layer to the story.
So, now we have all these pieces on the table.
the story from the interview, the behavioral observations, the data from the tests, the life history. The final and maybe most important step is putting it all together. This is where the real skill comes in, assembling that puzzle into a picture that makes sense.
And this, right here, is the biggest takeaway of all. No single tool, not one, is perfect or can tell the whole story. An interview might be biased, a test score can lack context, an observation might just be a one-time thing. But when you combine them all, the strengths of one tool make up for the weaknesses of another. This multi-method approach is what leads to an assessment that's reliable, valid, and actually centered on the whole human being.
So I'll leave you with a question to think about. How does taking the time to combine all these different sources not only protect against mistakes and bias, but ultimately lead us to a much more accurate, much more compassionate human story? It's something worth considering.